Welcome everybody. I'm going to call this order or meeting of the big board to order. It's Monday, June 12th, 2023. It's about 9:35, and welcome board members and all the guests that we have here. So, headquarters in our where our ice chillers are for skating, which is ice skating in the winter, roller skating in the summer, and it's also where we do the skate rental storage and also store things for our city events in the basement of the building. What we have here is a placemaking endeavor in a center consistent with the Washington 2050 vision. This area, as you can see, about 3,000 units of housing right up. You can see to the north of us, we have two large apartment buildings on a street called Little Vista, about three of these little blocks north of here. And the area in between those buildings and where we are now, it will be filled with other similar buildings that are mixed-use residential, mixed-use office. And they're all, these buildings are basically all entitled to going this in. And then this part that you're looking at out the window here to the south, the Milford Commons skate loop, and there's a splash pad out there, is the first phase of this development. This park-like area will actually extend north and arc over towards 1300 East or Richmond Avenue, and be more green park that plans for a green state. The total park area will be about 6 acres when we're done. We've just done this in phases in terms of how it's easy to finance, and also because we need to use this area for parking. The building to our west is Mill Creek's new city hall. It's a 6-story structure. The top floor of the building will be a community room that's available for people to rent for receptions. It'll seat about 200 people for a sit-down dinner, and for a conference can hold more like 300, 350. The ground floor of the building is the public market. It's also available for public use. When we get surveys, it's a new city. We're kind of nervous about building a big city hall, 6 years into our cityhood, giving some voice to the people that said that we would build a Taj Hall, that this will just be a disaster if we incorporate. But what we found in the survey that we did of our residents before we launched into design of this is the public wanted some space. They didn't want just a city hall. They wanted space for the public in there. So ground floor is the public market. They can kind of roll out on the farmers market onto this plaza. We have incubator space for refugee restaurant in there. We put out a RFP for that, and we have a fellow who's a Somalian immigrant refugee who has been operating a food truck. This will be his first work in the other location, so he'll have the opportunity to be in there until he graduates, hopefully, to a finance facility. We're also going to have Mill Creek Coffee Roasters won the RFP, which we're happy about. It's kind of our namesake coffee company. There's a connection, obviously, but they'll be in there on the ground floor. And then the other part of that ground floor will be available for programming for different kinds of events. So we're excited about that building. When it's done, it won't just be a glass box. There's a metal beam that goes on the outside of it that helps with the cooling of the building and the not overheating and the thing. So it'll look a little bit different than what the glass box. To the west of that will be a structured parking structure, and then the whole block there will be wrapped with a mixed-use residential building with retail on the ground floor and apartments above. So we're excited about this. Is building a town center for our city, and the city of otherwise we're kind of planned placemaking endeavor. So anyway, I'm happy to welcome you here, and we have a lot to do today. So
Mayor, can I just say, as a Mill Creek resident, we love this. It has created a sense of identity for the city, for fun, as the mayor said, as a center. And they did the general plan first, and then did a specific plan for this area, and it has been so well received by all of the residents of the community. And the fact that it really is a mixed use, that there's public amenities, and there's the city hall, the business, and the residential all coming.
Why are you canceling them all?
I've honestly not heard a single negative thing said about it. early on, Mayor, as you noted, some people said, well, what makes sense? But you really engaged the community and executed on it really well. So as a resident and as a partner, I would say kudos, it's really great.
Thanks. Yeah, there was pushback when we first started talking about this. But once the people saw, and we did the ice ribbon and the skate loop first. And I think, I don't know, that was maybe easier to do than building this big building in terms of financing of that, but it has actually paved the way in terms of community acceptance of the thing. People can kind of see the vision a little bit more, see that there's something for the public. Thanks, Amy. So, Laura, let's do some introductions around the room and then we'll do.
Okay, well, first, I also live in Mill Creek. Mayor and I are almost neighbors. We're within walking distance of one another, and I just Laura Hampton, I'm with the governor's office.
Personality policy director of the league.
Justin Lee, deputy director of the league.
Christina Oliver, I'm director of housing and community.
Well, I tell people that, you know, people come here in business, you can always move.
Conflicts often.
That's it, the mayor, we're all Hucksters in our own way, right? We'll have, you know,
Kate Bradshaw, member of the Donaldson City Council, and inspiration for your extreme.
It was, and they, so I was talking to Mayor Danes about this, since Logan is the one, but I just want to say that, you know, it's so much different than the private sector. When we were exploring this idea, Bountiful was super helpful. We did a tour up there. Merriman has been super helpful with theirs, and we looked around the country at different operations, but you know, you wonder about, is it gonna, you know, how much of the money sink is it gonna be? Is it gonna, you know, will the operation cost help offset some of the expenses? And then what are best practices about operating it? And, you know, most of us don't have any kind of experience on this, but it is the kind of thing that we don't really see very many of these in the private sector. You know, it used to be there were facilities like this, but almost all of them were private parks at this point. So I appreciate the comment.
Holly Gaines, Mayor.
Mark Shepard, Mayor Foothill.
That's so many Mayor Milky.
Again, we go to the league. Seth Aaron, city manager, Scott.
Fremont, this council members to be able to do this.
Jim Gruber, proud Mill Creek resident. And executive director of the Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Molly Wheeler, deputy director of the league.
Mary Winch, Manti City Council.
I'm Gary Walker, I'm the league.
Nick Jarvis, Chief Operating Officer with the League.
Alyssa Campbell, moderating housing program manager.
Ryan Beck with Indigenous. I'm Cody Lutz, also with Division East Office Planner. Already rooting.
We have a crowd field with that.
Okay, Riley with me.
Okay, so we have, that's already been, so Nick Jarvis would just announce he's online, that'd be easier, so you don't have a problem in which order to go into.
Yes. So let's see from the top. We have Scott Phillips, council member Cedar City, Roger Tu, general counsel for the league, Casey Kerrigan, legal intern with the league, council member Dustin White with Roosevelt, Jackie Nostrom, the recorder with Harriman City and the Recorders Association, council member Jessica Egbert with Mapleton. Carson is here and online. Mayor Logan Monson with Blanding, Mayor Mark Johnson with Lehigh, Mayor Michelle Randall with St. George, Mayor Mickey Wright with Torrey, and Mayor Troy Walker with Draper.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. We miss anybody? Yeah, everybody. Okay, awesome. So then,
These are members of the public in here. We have Aspen Hawks, Jennifer Edwards, and Miranda Jones Cox.
Okay.
Okay, great. I've clicked promote to panelist a couple times. And we'll see. And Miranda's with Wasatch Front.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you, Nick. So let's move into the agenda then and consider review and approval of the minutes of our last meeting. May 15th, 2023. And if those are in order, I'll entertain a motion. Move to approve minutes.
Motion?
Yeah, we have a motion and a second to approve minutes, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? For those are approved, thank you. And then, there's conflict of interest forms, the others in paper, make it happen, because it's disclosed. Please do that. And then, next, you had a municipal election update. Cameron and I had some interesting phone calls about this, and, we're gonna be, having a different date for our election.
Thank you, Mary.
Hey, Cam, if I can just interrupt real quick, we're hearing online that it's kind of hard to hear some people. I've been trying to mess with the microphone. There's only one available, so just speak up if you're not particularly close.
And yeah, if you direct your voice to the center of the room at the owl. it'll pick it up.
Perfect. First of all, thank you everybody for being here. For the board members, you'll notice that there are a lot more guests than usual. That's because I would argue this is the most important June board meeting that we've had in my time as the lead. Yes, we have to approve the budget today, and that's important to make sure we can keep the lights on for a lot of fun. But there are also a ton of moving parts within the overall ULCT growth space. This is your opportunity as board members to provide us with direction and also provide feedback to our colleagues from the governor's office in Division Utah and legislative staff. We're all here for some of these conversations. Before we get to the ULCT piece, we recognize that everybody's world was rocked a little bit last week because of this election. So we have a lot of slide questions we'll be asking later in the meeting. To make sure that we get as much feedback as possible from this meeting. The first things first, let's talk about the election. Justin actually was the perfect person on staff for us last week as we were taking these late night phone calls, trying to figure out the steps. Justin, I'll turn it over to you to explain what we know and what's going to happen this week.
All right, thank you. Here's what we know. We know that the governor's put out a proclamation moving the municipal election dates. The changes are the primary, instead of being held in August, will be held on September 5th, the day after Labor Day. The general election, instead of being held the first Tuesday of the month, will be held on November 21st. Those are the changes that we know so far. There's a lot of details that they're still haggling through, some to do with registration dates. They're working out when things will be postmarked, particularly to the primary, given that post office will be closed the day before the election on Labor Day. There will be a special session this Wednesday, 4 o'clock, where we'll find out all of those details. I just looked, the bill file's not public yet. Representative Cal Musselman is going to be the sponsor of the bill, but they're working through some of those details. Our plan is to hold a webinar this Friday in conjunction with the election office to answer whatever questions we will have answers to by Wednesday, so we can give you a better picture. But that's the general overview. For those of you who wonder why we can't do it more quickly, there is a federal law that requires for a federal election the ballots be sent out to military and overseas voters no later than 45 days before the election. That is non-negotiable. That is something the DOJ takes very seriously. So there is a certain amount of time you need in between those elections in order to comply with the federal law. And given that it's a congressional election, they pay very close attention. So that's
the person resigning could change their dating so that it could be.
that's true.
48 cities worth of candidates. Local government is stuff done versus that.
So with that, I'm happy to take any more feelings.
Right.
Yeah.
And I appreciate Councilmember Bradshaw's frustration about this. Those of us that are running, nobody likes to having campaign for 2 more weeks. But I do want to say that I believe that the timing of resignation is likely correlated with anticipated action in Congress, which means that there probably wasn't much opportunity to convince the congressman to change the dates. And I do want to actually just thank the governor for listening, because the original date that the governor was considering was moving the election was like December 7th. December 5th, yeah. Okay, and that would have extended everything for a month. And so I think it's less disruptive to only have it be 2 weeks than a month. And the other concern here that we discussed with the governor's office, I didn't, but and Justin did, is, you know, there's at least one of our major cities, Ogden anyway, is going to have a new mayor. We know that because McCall is not running again. I mean, obviously, there's the prospect of that in some of the other cities that have their mayoral election. You know, Mill Creek, Salt Lake City, Hooper, West Jordan, I think, there.
Yes.
And so, you know, hopefully we we won't see too big of a change over frequency with respect to those communities, but to the extent we do, there's a transition that's involved there, and this shortens the time that the newly elected mayor might have to get up to speed, and that actually could be, I think, detrimental to the operations in certain cities. So I'm glad the governor was receptive to that and wanted to consider shortening that time. So while it's not ideal in any event, it is at least probably the best under circumstances.
Yeah, Mayor, and that's really important to note that when Cam got a call from the governor's office, I got a call from the lieutenant governor almost simultaneously. And what they told us first was it's going to be on December 5th. That was the message. It wasn't, hey, what do you think about this? It's here's what we're going to do. And we let them know we thought about it anyway. And yeah, there were some shifts there, so it is a better scenario than what we could have ended up with.
Okay. Anything else on that? Any other questions?
Mayor, we'll be doing that webinar on Friday after the special session. Tell everybody this is what's happening on the special session. So we'll do that webinar Friday.
Thanks, and I know we have a recorder representative online anyway, but I appreciate if you would do what you can through your organization to get that word out. I spoke with a North Creek City recorder. I sent her the Friday fax link to that webinar, and I don't believe that she heard about it otherwise. So making sure that all of our city reporters get that message would be helpful.
Yeah, there's gonna be some expenses the cities have to bear on this, so they're gonna give us some money.
I haven't heard.
I'm sure you have a good one.
Yeah, I'll get them your campaign running too.
Mayor, actually, with this part of the conversation, we have the governor's office. So last, as just mentioned, Tuesday night, we started getting a phone call the next 24 hours. 12 of us were on call, basically not stop. Now we're going to need to point out. Particularly for smaller communities that with a first week, if December 5th at the state date, you would have mid-December caucus. And most cities don't hold meetings in December. And for our smallest communities that do meetings just once a month, you're then the requirement to do the second meeting, that does cost money. That was part of the effort to try to move it up into November so that you can still do the canvas on your regularly scheduled early December meeting. Now, for a city that maybe doesn't have a meeting that weekend, you would have to do an additional meeting that week of Thanksgiving in order to do your canvas. So yes, we raised that issue. We also reached out to all the different city managers to try to get a sense of how could we document the fiscal impact here so we can share those state leaders, and the response to that was we're not sure we actually can document this impact as a regular meeting anyways. It's different than if you have to hold a full meeting. And then part of the overall effort here was 1 ballot versus 2 ballots to be easier to voters, which then reduces the overall cost down. So anyway, yes, we have raised that point, and at this point, I'm not anticipating any money, but that's also because they moved it up a little bit earlier to try to align.
Sure, there's some sort of federal grant in this one. The other comment, Mayor, if I may, on that one is, I know the state elections office is, there's also very good cost of running the full election, and they're still fighting about that. Having been in that position before in the legislature, somehow things election just happen every time. I don't know how they think that, but they do. And so fighting for any funds is a real fight, right?
Okay. Let's move on then, I think. And so then we're going to talk about things. You notice that the first one is the air quality board.
Yeah, you might know something.
Yeah, so this is kind of was I don't know, tumultuous and Suzanne Harrison, was nominated and not approved by the Senate subcommittee. So the governor, appointed me to serve on the air quality board, and at least I survived the Senate, committee, hearing. Anyway, so,
You did a great, Mayor Silver, you did a great job with the committee testimony.
And I was actually there because I too have been appointed to it, and so you did do a great job. I was, really, the fact that you're on Zoom, you like killed it, saying, again, I'm so sorry, I'm not there in person, so we all felt we were sorry that you weren't there.
I don't know, I probably would sweat more. If
I was there in person, but it out.
Okay, thanks. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, so congratulations, Mayor Silver Sweeney there. I used to work for the division of air quality, so I already told them to watch out. And then for other appointments on local commissions, we don't have any for this month. We're still trying to find somebody for the engine. So anybody has a way if they want to volunteer, but yes,
All I'm told at this point.
yeah, pretty much. So that's it for board commissions. Okay, thank you. So you want to move on to our board?
Yeah, sounds great. So a couple of years ago, was when staff went to the board to talk to the idea of hiring ARPA specialists to fill the other spot of the legislative research analyst. And that's me. So a couple of years ago, when the American Rescue Plan Act was passed, there were a lot of different pieces to it, but the piece that I was in with were the state and local fiscal recovery funds that went to each city and town and to all the states. There were four main categories there that are in the board memo there, supporting the public health and economic response, premium pay for eligible workers, water, sewer, broadband infrastructure, and then replacing lost public sector revenue. That last one was the one that softly changed the most from the interim final rule to the final rule, as they made that exception for a standard amount of about $15 million to exceed what your allocation was. And that was done by a lot of the advocacy work of the National League of Cities and in coordination with the state agency. So by final count, 155 cities and towns paid voluntary assessments on that position. That ranged from a population of all the way up to 100,000 population down to just a couple hundred of smaller cities and towns. So we had different allocations from those that had $17,000 to over $15 million in our perspective to spend those funds and to report those funds. And they range from a wide variety of needed assistance from those larger cities and towns that had finance directors and city managers that were doing it to the park and rural mayor that had to stop their tractor to take a phone call. So it was really awesome to be able to work with
County Commission upstairs.
on a lot of different types of projects, whether they were affordable housing projects, drinking water projects, air ventilation, broadband connectivity, the whole range of them. So it was really great, and I read a lot of the manual, which was less fun, but okay. Also the GOPD and Dolio, as they administered their grant applications, if you remember those from 2 years ago, and then last summer, the GOPD one had more than 45 applications requesting for $1 billion. So we're working with Laura Hanson and her team over there really closely on that one. That was a big undertaking. So that was really great to see as well. And everyone that we were able to reach out to successfully was able to complete their reports on time and get those submitted. So it was really great, and a really good success walking through those reporting. And if anyone has any questions, I'd love to take them.
I just want to say, I mean, as a municipality that reached out and had assist us, that I know that my finance staff and also my legal counsel appreciated that actually help. Even a lot of times it was like just like crossing T or dotting I to make sure are we on the right track with this thought. But it was great to have an expert in house, and I think this was an innovative program. I'm not sure how many other states or leagues did something like this, but I think it was appreciated across the state. So I mean, you did a great job. So thank you very much.
There, two of the things why I want to applaud Wayne for his work, and I also want to applaud the board for creating this innovative position. Right now, we're the first in the country to ask cities to share some of their ARPA dollars so that we in turn can provide the service And as they've indicated, 155 communities that participate in the sponsoring program, all where we meet deadlines and stay on top of these federal requirements. And for many of these communities, it's the first time they'd ever been part of a program like this. So we think it was successful, but as this fiscal year is closing out and most of that money has not been spent on the whole program next fiscal year, we wanted to return the report to the board about the way we accomplished in this role. So, any questions for Liam or for us and staff?
I would just say, kudos to us as representing small cities. It was a really big contribution to us, because we don't have staff that can oversee any of this. And so, to coordinate with Liam and ask those questions was really, really helpful. And Liam, you're staying on the, you're not leaving.
I'm gonna fill out.
Yeah, we're good there.
Yes, indeed, he is. Given that.
Yeah.
From the positions. Okay, so let's, now we can talk about our budget, and, we need to have a public hearings, and then that budget, I guess, so I'm gonna choose over to Cam, on this.
They can do public hearing first.
Let's open it up for the public hearing first.
All right, so I'll entertain a motion to open the public hearing to, consider public comment with respect to the fiscal year 2020.
Second.
Motion and second, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The public hearing is now open. We have, members of the public or anyone who wants to address us, especially the budget issues. And Nick, I don't know if you want to run through the presentation of this, please, or please.
Sure. I was just taking off the share screen so that we could see the members of the public and see if there was anything. It doesn't look like there's anything online. Bring this back up. So as you can see, there have been no changes to the tentative budget that was presented to you in May. Everything is exactly the same, and that's why this memo is so tiny right here. This just states that we have noticed the meeting and through the proper channels and published it in the Trib. But then I've also included the exact same memo and numbers from the May meeting. The highlights here are that it is where are my totals here? So it is a $5.547 million budget. But a large portion of that, 1.58 million, is an appropriation from GOPB at the state for our local administrative advisor program. So you'll see at the end of the numbers, and it'll take me too long to scroll and come back up, but you'll see we've given you what our budget looks like compared to last year's budget without a state appropriation, the increases there, and then what it looks like with the state appropriation. Other than that, or actually not other than that, but nothing has changed since last time. If anyone has any questions about what we approved last time, general revenue, as you can see, it's almost a 7% increase over last year's budget, which is in line with the dues increase we had and the inflationary pressures that everyone's facing currently. Happy to answer any questions about the particulars. And if I can get to the numbers here, you'll be able to take a look at that.
Right, so Laura Hanson's from the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget is here to talk particularly about the local administrative advisory funds for Laura. Do you want to talk about this before we entertain public comment?
Yeah, sure, I'll take it. Thank you so much for having me. When I first started at the state, so I've been there about 2 years now, there wasn't really a job description for my job. And so I did kind of a listening tour, and I talked to a bunch of different entities, both within state government and outside, about kind of where there are gaps and needs and where I could add value, but not step on toes or duplicate efforts. And one of the things that came up over and over and over again was our local governments need some more support. Every time there's a change that happens at the legislature, it sets off this whole domino, effect of local governments trying to update their ordinances and their general plans to keep them to date on all of the changes. And so while we've been there, we've tried to tackle that in a couple of different ways. A couple of sessions ago, we're able to get some funding that would fund a new position within each of the AOPs around the state for purposes of planning and technical assistance. So really focused on ordinance updates, general plan updates, things like that. In addition to that, we have found that, through these conversations, that there's a big need for administrative support in local government. A lot of really small communities in particular, they may not even have one full-time paid administrative staff member. The mayor's working volunteer to try and tackle things, and they may not have the technical expertise that's really needed to tackle a lot of issues. And so Pam and I started kind of cooking up this idea of sort of the shared city administrator function. A lot of communities may need the help of essentially a city manager, but not full time, nor do they have the resources to hire somebody full time, but they can use a couple hours a week. And so the idea here was for a pooled or kind of shared resource that can support multiple communities. And so after a lot of kind of discussion and thinking through that, we have come up with a program that we were able to successfully get funded during the last session, which we're calling the Local Administrative Advisor Program. And the program, Nick and Molly and Gary can all go into this in more detail, but basically it would fund a new position within each of the AOGs around the state and 2 new positions within the League of Cities and Towns for purposes of providing this local assistance. The idea is really that the league would provide sort of training, mentoring to the administrative advisors within each of the AOGs. So we're really excited about it. I know Nick and Molly are a little antsy to get the contract finalized, and I am the bottleneck on that, but we're going to get it done this week. That's my commitment, and then we'll be able to enter into the contracts with the AOGs as well. But so the money will flow from GOPB to the league, then the league will enter into agreements with the AOGs for those supplements.
Or then will the local municipals have a contract with their local AOGs that help them work? So we're just waiting to hear from them on when we sign those.
Well, we don't actually anticipate, and Nick or Molly or Gary, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we really anticipate contracts between the AOGs and the municipalities. It's more kind of an ad hoc basis, a shared resource that you could pull into. The idea is that, one city may need a lot of support for a short period of time, and then they finish their project, and then they don't really need anything for a while, but another city may bring it up. And so it's kind of, a resource that kind of a hotline, that you can say, I need to phone a friend, I need some help. And then that friend can step in and assist. So I don't really think it was envisioned to have contracts with the municipalities themselves, maybe on specific.
I think there really some MOU depending on how to make sure that like liability is covered for that, but yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Anyways.
Can I just add, as an AOG rep in the room, also, all of the AOGs are handling this in a slightly different ways that make sense for their area. What works for your area is going to be different than what works for the Wasatch Front. But we're all anticipating being able to meet the communities where they are, provide support, may work for you, and all the AOGs are working with the league and the GOPP to make sure it's as effective as possible.
Okay, perfect.
So one of the things that I know Mary answered before me, and I've been trying to do as well, is because we're both on the Wasatch Front and in Salt Lake County, trying to make sure that I have solid conversations with rural communities, and so like 6-county AOG, and I'm going to hopefully be meeting with people in the basin for the site actually meet about that. But anyway, I've had conversations with them. A lot of the communities in rural and smaller communities are, concerned as always about if they do kind of unfunded mandates regarding having to change legislation to comply with state law. I know the 6-county growth summit that we went to, there were a lot of questions that we fielded about the new subdivision requirements and how communities were going to, what that really meant, because I think there was some misunderstanding there, and also just how they would do that. To a community, all of them are looking forward to this program if they don't have that kind of staff. So it's not just a city recorder and a mayor or something that kind of figure out what to do and get some actual professional help. And hopefully that will help our communities comply with state law and also help, I think, promote some uniformity in some of those responses, which is part of what we're trying to do with subdivisions, so that we actually accomplish the goal of making it easier for everybody to understand those processes, so that they're more uniform. Anyway, this is a fantastic program. It's also another program that I think where our league is leading out, where we're doing this and other states haven't thought of it. We talked with folks at conferences about this, and they're going like, that's a great idea.
All right, two quick things for the board. Number one, when you approve the budget here, hopefully you'll approve the budget momentarily, but when you do, that will also authorize us as a league to accept these state dollars effective July. So just know that of the $1.58 million that is flowing through the local administrative advisory program, we will be using some of that to cover the compensation for Gary and for Liam as the program is underway. So the question earlier about what happens to Liam Joel post ARPA money, his name will be pivoting into being the staff person to help with the local administrative advisory program, which is an ongoing state appropriation. As Mercer indicated, first of its kind in the country. We've got a lot of state leagues who are watching us to see what happens with them. We're very excited about it. Second thing I want to point out for board purposes, that UCMA gave us a tremendous amount of feedback. Gary's been in close communication with UCMA as well. I mean, the MOUs we've been writing, both the AOGs and the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget. We've been incorporating that feedback from the city managers, the City and County Management Association as well. So once you approve the budget, that will authorize us to accept that money from July 1. The program.
Is there any public comment with respect to the program?
We do not have any comment from online.
Seeing no public comment, then I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing. Did you get rid of the motion?
I don't think so. Motion second. Excellent, thank you.
With some ambiguity, but all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Now let's turn to the approval of the 2024 fiscal year budget and the budget, actual budget. So any make a motion on that, you guys can this again.
We approved the 2023 budget. 2024 budget.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second budget. Any further discussion on that? Thanks for putting that together. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is approved. We have the budget.
All right.
All right, so let's talk about adding a roast and it's gonna be really.
I'm going to do a quick overview. We'll pick it up. Thank you, Mayor. First, thank you for approving the budget. Thank you for the confidence that shows in us as staff, and thank you for your commitment to the league mission that's reflected in that budget. Our league mission has been engaging at a very high level with the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission. Mayor John Ramsey's online. She's out of state, which is she's joining us online. And what we hope to accomplish over the next hour in this advocacy engagement space is to get general feedback from you as a board to inform our deliberations within the global UEOC network. And to give you a sense of how broad the UEOC network is right now, in just the month of June, just within the UEOC housing and growth space, so that doesn't include the water, the efficiency, all the other spaces. Just the housing growth space, in the month of June alone, there are at least 15 scheduled meetings with all those different groups that we as staff and other league representatives are met. So 15 in the month of June alone. I didn't calculate that's in July, August. June would get it across, and that also doesn't have to include legislative inter meetings that are happening this week with all of the demands there from there.
Yeah, I would like to point out the government efficiency group only has like one meeting. You wanna guess which one I volunteered?
Yeah.
That sounds pretty efficient for me.
So over the next hour, we'll be asking you some Slido questions, later during this hour. But there will be 4 different sections, so we'll have a quick update on value of growth, and Laura, I'll turn to you this month to give a quick momentary update there. Then we'll do an update on the SB 174 technical assistance program related to subdivisions. This technical assistance money will also become available July 1st, and we've invited Christina Oliver to give an update there. At one point, we thought we may need to absorb some of that money into our budget. That still may occur. It just wasn't ready to make this determination this week, so that's why it's not part of the budget document. We wanted to be in the budget, in our budget meeting today, make sure this piece is on your radar. Then we'll have Envision Utah, who is using funds through the Department of Workforce Services to review local government land use ordinances, housing affordability. We'll have Ari Rudy, the executive director, present some of their preliminary findings. We'll have a discussion with this group about context and some other key questions they have for mayors and council members. And then we'll have our Slido questions to inform us in our deliberations with the UEOC, the Commission on Housing Affordability. So that's what I hope to accomplish over the next hour. I want to thank Mayor Ramsey, who's been in many of these UEOC meetings, fighting a good fight for cities. In fact, at the most recent UEOC meeting, she presented the 4 questions that the board approved last month. And then at the Commission on Housing Affordability meeting last week, I presented those 4 questions to that commission to try to frame all the dialogue that we discussed in this board meeting today. So with that, Laura, will take a moment, just give a quick overview of where we're at with guiding our growth.
Yeah, sure. I hope that you all heard about this effort at this point. Guiding Our Growth is a statewide conversation about growth, responding to feedback that the league and others have heard through surveys that Utahns as a general whole are feeling a little bit anxious about the pace of growth in our state. I just want to do like a quick scan around the room to make sure I don't miss anybody. We are engaged with so many partners. The League of Cities and Towns, Christina's office, Envision Utah has taken a huge role, Wasatch Front Regional Council, as well as the partner working with this policy. So we launched phase 2 of this exercise, or this conversation. There is a survey online right now at guidingourgrowth.utah.gov. We encourage, my little call to action to each of you is to help promote this among your residents and encourage people to participate. The more voices we have, the better the input that we're going to have in this exercise. And that's a particular key to those of you that represent rural areas off the Wasatch Front. I think Envision, we're up to what, 12,600 and something survey responses. Just under 2,000 of those are for rural areas. And so if you represent a rural area, we really appreciate your help.
Laura, with this survey, are you able to then come back to us with more specific data to our area then?
You bet. Yeah. So there's actually 3 different versions of the survey, one for urban areas, one for rural areas that are growing, and then one for rural areas that are kind of experiencing slow to stagnant growth. That is, you're directed to the right survey based by your zip code. So we can actually filter all of the data by zip code and tell you, these are the responses for more individual communities. That said, the more you slice and dice it, I'm looking at Cody here, he's coaching on this. The more you slice and dice it, the less definitive it is, right? So we're working on that. We're also considering funding an actual statistically valid survey, because right now it's sort of self-selected, people just jump on. Anyways, we're really excited about the effort, and I don't know if Ari or Andrew or Kim, Christina, if anybody wants to have anything for that. Yeah, exciting.
Yeah, please help share it.
Reminder, how long's out? The closing
It
date.
closes August 31st. And it
You have to look at it on to it.
It takes a little bit of time to go through the survey too.
How long do you think? If we're gonna tell them how long?
I would say plan out about.
Okay.
I mean, you can go more or less, but
I'll put 10 to 15.
I think the average is about 15, so if you tell them 10, that's a good bait switch.
I would add just briefly on this, the survey, the purpose of the survey and the results is not to replace anything that local communities are planning in their areas themselves, or the plans that we all have put together for our communities. It's at a higher level. It's intended to inform policymaking going forward, to be a supplement to all of the great planning work that's done at the local and the regional and state level already. Point number one. Point number two, I think Laura, already can, it's also fair to say that part of the intention of the survey is to help reach the hearts and minds of Utahns who, as Laura said, are concerned about growth. So there's a messaging component, sort of a communications aspect to help address those concerns. So it's about policy and about addressing what sometimes pejoratively referred to as NIMBYism, but really is more honestly just community concern about change. So it has those two objectives, and it's only going to be successful if we're all engaged in helping to make it a success. You know, get people to take a survey and then use the results and share the results.
One of the things I think that has value, and I commend you and that people that work in this how it's been designed, because not only is it asking for feedback, but it's also seeking to engage Utah residents and doing some of the problem solving that we actually do as local officials. It's like, you know, there's a good way to see when you take the survey that there are consequences to a decision that you might make. And it's fine if you want to make that kind of decision about how to guide the growth, but then you have to be prepared to accept the consequences of that kind of decision. And that also then make up, you know, the way about, well, maybe my initial, choice wasn't really what that strikes the right balance. I just think it does a good job of letting people see how difficult these decisions are.
Mayor, let me know why our growth matters from today's conversation. There are quite a few policy asks that you were just referencing in that survey that are being discussed this summer. So, for example, Laura graciously shares a weekly update with me, so I'm able to see as the results are coming in what the residents are. There are discussions there about parking. There are discussions there about mixed use. There are discussions there about setbacks. There are discussions about open space preservation. So what we are anticipating is a few months from now, these results will come out. Well, since what the public is at, it's going to parallel the policy discussions that were happening this summer, which is why today's slide was really so important. So Laura, thank you for that overview. Let me pivot to subdivisions now. Do a quick update with Christina on subdivisions, and then we'll hit the ordinances. We will have Slido questions during the Vision Utah presentation. So be prepared for the board input on the Vision Utah piece. So Christina, can you give us a quick overview of where we're at on the technical assistance program?
Absolutely. So we received $4 million. We will be hiring someone in our shop to oversee the invoice submission of this program. So I want to start by saying we're not pushing the followers to lead to hire someone and create a whole new program. What we're doing is the state is going to do an RFQ for a pool of attorneys and a pool of planners. And with that pool, each municipality that needs assistance, and I want to talk about how to before I veer off. When I say needs assistance, there are many cities that are extremely capable of doing this on their own. So if you have a fully staffed legal team and you have a competent attorney and you have a competent planning staff, those are the municipalities that I would ask you to kind of use this at your discretion if you truly need it, because we have a lot of little municipalities throughout the state who have no one. So we are setting a cap initially at 25 hours of assistance, combination of legal and planner usage. But again, if you're a city, and I'm going to say Salt Lake City, just beat me up later, but they have an extremely competent legal team as well as an extremely competent planning team. And adopting the code that will meet state code is something that they can probably do in-house, and they don't need an outside attorney to look at. But Nephi, perhaps, is a municipality that could utilize our help, and their need may be greater than 25 hours. So we're going to be working with the league on each request for over 25 hours, but we are really encouraging the large municipalities to give it a go on their own. And I say that because the league is gonna come up with training materials, checklists. The checklist will be required in, for us to pay any invoices. But the league will be saying, really, do you need 50 hours? I don't wanna choose any large city at this point, but but if you're, no, I don't want that. If you're a large municipality and you're requesting more hours, we're gonna ask you. You have a, if you have a capable team, you have a team. You sure do. Most definitely. But we really wanna ensure that there's enough money to go around, because it's $4 million, it seems like a lot, but it can be used never on our feet. The UAC is taking a slightly different approach. They are hiring a full-time, land use attorney in order to help the unincorporated areas. That doesn't mean that they're not going to use some of the league materials that are produced, so that we're all, our goal is to have some sort of, consistency throughout the state, so these ordinances aren't all over the place, but they are going to be matched to the community that we are actually assisting. So we're not coming in forcefully. I like to call ourselves the bank. So we will be working with the league, working with UAC, we'll be receiving invoices. We will pay the vendors directly, so there won't be any sort of transactional issues that you all have to deal with. And our attorney is drafting up some language that takes our legal, any legal ramifications against us out of the picture, so that we truly are the bank, if you will, and the attorney or the planner that's helping the municipality is taking the burden on. The RFQ, July 1, everybody knows all the dollars in the state are available July 1. So it is going to take a couple weeks longer to get our RFQ out on the street, but this is a good thing because state procurement is actually running it for us. So none of us really have to do a lot of that work. It's not something we typically do, but with a lot of years in banking. What else do you want me to talk about?
No, I think that's great. A week ago, there was a possibility that the league was going to take over much of what Christine just described. Thank you, Christina, for her work behind the scenes, at the city level, to try to keep as much of the administration program at the state level. We've already been underway on our technical assistance pieces, which are the documents to help on a high level, in terms of the direct appropriations to the attorney pool to help cities. At this point, it will all likely flow through DWS. The only thing we need from the board today is we actually don't need a motion today. I thought we were going to need one if we were going to be basically taking over the building. But I appreciate Christine and her team, Melissa's here, the modern capacity plan, side of things are even further to work with. This will be a tremendous opportunity for our small communities and communities across the state to come in compliance. Clock ticking, February 1st is the deadline for cities above 5,000 to bring subdivision ordinances into compliance with SB 174. For everybody else, for 5,000 population, it's the subsequent the 31st. There's a lot of work to do there. So thank you for that update, Christina. Anything else you want to add?
We will be giving the league an amount of money as well to pay for creating the material and providing training, so that it can be an unfunded mandate. I think that's about it.
Yep, and that'll be on a reimbursement basis, so we'll amend our budget as we go that out. No motion to it. Thank you, Christina. And speaking of DWS money, the Department of Workforce Services received an appropriation 2 sessions ago to fund this review of land use ordinances that impact housing affordability. The entity that earned that responsibility was Envision Utah, and so Ari, I'm going to turn it over to you. Probably better actually going to come from your slide. Yeah, stand near the owl.
Yeah, I'll introduce it.
So let me, I'll give you Christina in just a second. Timing wise, Ari, we'll give you about 5 minutes to give the overview of the project, and then we have a slide of questions that will help inform the back and forth. Of course, if you just pull the slide of questions up on the screen so people can eyeball those as Ari presents. The preliminary results, that Envision Utah had presented to the Envision Utah board last week. I'm a member of that board, so we were on that call, for any packet, so hopefully you had a chance to review those preliminary results last week. And then these will be the slide of questions that we'll be asking you as a group as well. So Christina?
Yeah, so this fund, 2022, 250,000, and we did an RFP for this particular project. And what it is to look at a minimum of 28 land use codes throughout the state. And, but Envision, of course, goes above and beyond, which we love, and so they're gonna be doing up to 35. These are really directed toward figuring out which codes are prohibitive of increasing the supply of housing. And so now I'll turn it over to the Envision project.
I guess by way of introduction, so we are scoped to look at 35 different codes. So we're not just looking at one ordinance, we're looking at the entire code essentially. So from all of the different AOGs, so we're looking urban, rural, county, city, and we're a little over halfway through, right? So, so what's in your packet with the findings is preliminary at this point, and we also have not gotten to any recommendations. So we want to hear from you, your reactions to some of the things we're seeing, so that as we continue to review, we can redirect, look at additional things, and figure out how to get from findings to recommendations. Because we want recommendations that make sense to everybody, not just for some sake, but not. I'm gonna let Ryan walk you through the findings really quick, and then we'll spend most of the time listening to you. But before we do that, you want to go to the next slide? Here we go. I want to set the context. So at Envision Utah, we do a lot of surveys where we listen to the public. 7 or 8 years ago, what we all heard the most complaints about was air quality, but now the mayor still screams on that board. That is not what we hear about. He's got it under control. Now what we hear about is housing. Now, housing is the #1 thing that people are concerned about. And there are a lot of factors involved in our latest run-up in housing. We've got a whole list right here. Everything from supply, materials costs and supply chains, labor costs, land costs, housing regulation is one piece of the puzzle. It is not the entire puzzle, but it's an important piece of the puzzle. But nevertheless, our scope is to look at that. So that's why we're focused on that today. When we asked different local experts how much of the increase in housing costs was housing regulation, the range we got was generally about 5%. So not nothing, but it's not everything. And I want to cover one more slide before I let them down. Keep on one more. Here we go. I also want to remind everybody, we have seen a significant boom in demand. And it's not just the pandemic and not just increased migration. If you look at the demographic population pyramid for Utah, you see a big bulge of people in their 20s and 30s. These are people looking to get into the housing market. So that's why the run-up in housing started before the pandemic. It's continuing today. These are our own kids who want homes. So that is what is going on. We've also seen a lot of immigration, so that's part of the issue too. So we got a lot of demand. We've seen a lot of supply constraints as well. Housing prices are going up. With that, I'm going to let Ryan really quickly walk you through the findings. Next slide. Yeah, I'll be quick on this.
Oops.
So, okay, perfect. I just want a quick reminder, we are focused
So
on.
if you can talk into Al.
Market rate. We're talking about market rate things here, which, helps with the whole housing continuum. So just to focus on that. And again, as a reminder, these things we're looking at. These things we're looking at, these regulations that we've selected. This is from, interviews from our, from our developers, our housing experts, people who know this stuff. So next slide. All right, finally the findings. Okay, I'm going to go through these pretty quick because you have them in the packet and we really want to hear from you. But finding #1, notice I said finding, not recommendation. Finding #1, large minimum lot sizes and frontage requirements. And kind of going on with that in this slide,
those frontage requirements are also large minimum setbacks. So I think this is a great example, that you hear, especially in a Wasatch Front constraint, again, this is statewide, but Wasatch Front is limit constraint. You can see the green area, it's just not buildable. And so we're leaving land on the table. So that's two. Finding number three, and this is not all the cities fault. This is what the market's demanding, but if you look at this data back from the 40s and 50s, we're building about twice the square feet that we used to build. So that's what the market's demanding. Again, not focused towards the cities. And then finding number four, we are finding almost all of our uses are separated. That makes sense. I think there's a good reason for that. But we're also finding that housing is not allowed in most of those zones, those commercial zones. Finding number six is all about single family zone. It just is predominant. If you look at some of these, if you look at this, this is the Wasatch, this is the Salt Lake Valley, but over 75% of the valley is zoned single family. And it's like, that is exactly what we're finding throughout the West, throughout these big cities in the West. So we're right in line with that. Finding number 7 is about lack of standardization in our codes. That can result in delays for developers, just adding time and money. Finding number 8 is about accessory dwelling units. And as an example, from a city right there on the Wasatch Front, if you wanted to put in a basement apartment, you're looking at things like a separate entrance, you're looking at things like larger windows, additional firewalls, separate utility meter. These things are very expensive for the average homeowner if they want to do what they can do in their basement, as an example. So with that, we want their feedback. So let's go to the slide of questions. Hopefully that wasn't too quick.
A question before you go to the side questions. On your slide that has the house with the circles around it. Yes. It's actually quite pretty.
Yeah, this.
So you have 5 to 15% and up to 25 with an asterisk. Yeah. I was curious because we've seen a variety of data from different parties. So where does that come from?
So phase 1 of this process, we got all the housing experts from cities, from developers, from different housing experts. We interviewed that table. So that's with only about 20 folks chiming in on this. Caveat, right? So that's
Okay, so the up to 25, where
Basically, there was an outlier. I think it was in 25%.
okay.
So we didn't. That was kind of outside of the.
Follow-up, maybe for a question. How did you mentioned a couple of times cities that you were talking to them? How did you choose those? Not anyone is mad at you.
So as per scope, we were required to do 2 cities and 2 counties from each AOG. And so that was one factor. And then the other one, we thought, well, within that sphere, where can we make the most difference? And we specifically went some that were bigger, some that were smaller, some that were rural, so we could get a really good mix of a good representation.
Some that were growing fast, some that not so much.
Did you get good feedback? And did you get good participation from the cameras for the type of city that was on it?
I think we had pretty good representation. The only part, as has been discussed here, very rural cities. I mean, they're just so short staffed, so a little more difficult there. But I think in the bigger cities on the Wasatch Front, it's pretty easy to get.
We also put together a stakeholder group that we've met with 3 times.
Interviews and then.
Two times, yeah. And so a mixture of developers and cities were listening to.
So for this, this piece there that we're talking about, were you interviewing, staff in those cities or elected officials?
Primarily like, staff, but we did get a few elected officials in the mix. And sometimes it was a group of 3 or 4, folks.
Question about your question. Is this the word for word? I mean, it says we asked those experts. I perceive land use and construction regulations very differently. So I'm kind of curious about the qualitative response. Was it 5 to 15% contribution leaning towards construction, leaning towards land? I'm just kind of interested in digging into that one.
Yeah, this is how the question was worded. I'm looking back at this is how it was, how it was worded. For the most part, it seemed like folks focused on the regulations and, but we did specifically ask during these interviews, because we were talking to developers, what about, the other side? Construction code, but for the most part, we're talking about regulations.
Land use regulations or construction, okay.
We get the full, well, just if you would mind sharing that of your percentage of the total development cost, like knowing that it's mostly between 5 to 15, but upwards of that, like it'd be helpful to know, like what that distribution is.
I don't have it in front of me.
No, it's not. Yeah, it's like.
I would put too much stock into that number. I think the key point is we talked to a lot of experts and they thought it was
Yeah.
something less than.
Yeah, this, they thought it was this.
Yeah.
We have a hand from Mayor Johnson online as well to ask a question.
Mayor Johnson, go ahead, what's your question?
Yeah, just on this slide that's up right now, and I hope you can hear me okay. I'm struggling with the audio today, but I find it interesting that subnote at the end on the 5 to 15% where it says most, responses referenced inclusion of necessary regulation. There's actually 3 types of regulation. You do have the necessary regulation, that would be all your infrastructure, impact fees, everything to construct that. Then you have that's really not necessary, that a lot of planners, a lot of cities ask for, like what color you're allowed to paint your door, that sort of thing. But you have some that's kind of, that's in between, and that would be the setbacks. Those are what the city believes they need for clearance for fire safety and accessibility and clearance to easements and utilities and that sort of thing. Are you going to be breaking those up a little bit so we can look at those separately, because all 3 of those need to be considered quite differently?
I actually think we want to hear from you guys a little bit about that, because obviously regulations have a lot of benefits. You mentioned the necessary regulations. Well, there are costs and benefits to regulation, right? You have to balance that, and I think that's why one of the slide up questions is, we found certain things in zoning code, but that doesn't mean they're bad, right? There may be benefits that say this is something we want to do.
We're putting in place at some point for.
Yeah, somebody thought it was a good idea.
I can appreciate this question I have questions about the question, but the point I think you're trying to make is not everybody thought it was all the city's fault. I'll take that. Let's roll with that. Right,
That's the point.
Yeah.
Yeah, not everybody thought it was all the city's fault, and people recognize that regulation has limits.
Yeah, that's positive. We'll take.
Build this slide. I know we're time limited. Should we decide our questions? Give everyone a chance to chime in.
We're so strenuous first, we pose the Slido questions. These are so far, just on this slide real quick before you go back to the slide before. These are the 4 questions we're going to ask you to help envision. And they also overlap with the ULCT. Everything that Ari and Ryan just hit, basically every policy point that they're looking at has come up in the ULCT conversation. So we'll be asking some other questions, both to help envision so that the work they're doing is meaningful for cities, also to help us. So let's start with that number 1 person. If you can do it, these are going to be open-ended. So Carson, go ahead and open the slide so people can do it. You can see the slide number, so you can explain for those who need it. Join.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody should be able to either use your phone, can scan the QR code. You can just go slide.com and put it onto the key. You can also send your key code down there if that's easier to.
Do you want us to put multiple answers in different lines or all clustered in one essay?
So you should be able to submit as many answers as you want. This will just be kind of like the response. So I'm going to show you to think that up. But yeah, I guess things come to your mind. Feel free to drop it in there. I'll just add some context year because we had been pushing this for a little while and I think let's say we'll start hearing this, but we did a study, we reached out to 57 communities last summer, asking them how many entitled but not permitted units they had. We had a count of about 111,000 from last year. I guess like since then. But we've been trying to dig into this a little bit too and understand, you know, markets, cities are doing the zoning piece, they're entitling these units, but they're not necessarily being delivered in a fashion that we'd like to see. So that's kind of our framing.
Yeah, some developers, we know what they say. Cheers, but.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I missed that.
I just want to thank Ray for the ammunition needed to convince the legislature that we need independent inspectors. That we can't let developers do their own inspection.
As you're filling this out, I also want to point out a couple things. We are a public, this is a public meeting, right? So, we have folks from the governor's office and legislative staff that are really interested in hearing our discussion. Keep that in mind as, you know, as you're filling this out. This is also your last chance as a board. Right now, we don't have a board meeting scheduled until August. So in the next couple of months, everything you put in the Slido for these next 10 or so questions, we're going to be using, so that we can advocate for you in these different settings. So we also aren't asking you to vote on anything here because there aren't any recommendations or bills to vote on. We're trying to get your feedback. So, anyway, once we get a couple more comments in here on these, not a lot.
What we're seeing here kind of goes back to that chart that's going on. We're seeing lacking infrastructure, we're seeing interest rates, we're seeing labor is up. Yeah.
One of the things going on is that.
Which size is that?
Carson, we move to the next question. You will start answering this question.
I don't think so.
And so we're waiting about 30 seconds.
We asked developers that we specifically pointed to the infrastructure, black infrastructure. It's good to get a fresh perspective.
Okay, going once, going twice. Okay, let's go to the next question. The next question. Already, you touched on this a couple of times, but go ahead and ask again.
Yeah, so Ryan walked really quickly through those findings and, you know, that's not to say that doing those things usually goes bad, right? There are benefits. So what are the benefits?
I'm gonna kind of jump in real quick again, as I was just looking through the presentation last night, and you mentioned the 5 feet window requirement. Yeah. So Utah is the criminal history dwelling unit code, and I use not like it's a use case, it's not an actual structural. It's very type. So the fire code requires about 5 feet of window space for just a typical basement. So if you're building a new home, you have to do that if it's going to be habitable space anyway. And then municipality, like the function doesn't apply until somebody's, well, municipality designates it as a 90 or until somebody says they're working there. So just wanting to go in the context of it. You'll see that number probably a lot just the city's adopting environmental standards. Yeah.
All right, Ryan, as these Slido pieces are coming in, my request to board members is this afternoon. Over the next few days, if you've had a chance to think through this conversation, re-review the slides that were in your packet. If other ideas come by, send them to us, we'll forward them to envision and we'll use it about I think it's interesting, the quality of life theme that has come out quite a bit.
And, you know, to add that more, we did this guiding our real estate life. I think we heard that every single community, how important maintaining that quality of life is to residents.
It's sometimes really nebulous.
Yeah.
Right?
They're not-
So your personal definition of having a 15-foot setback on the side of your home is not everybody's definition of quality of life. So quality of life for a number of people is simply being able to purchase that. Whether that be a condo, a townhome, a small lot development, we need to, I think that's one of the things that growing our conversation about growing is it's nuanced and not just my way or the
That's right.
variety is options.
Quite a lot.
Like you're right.
When your sewer line, when your sewer lateral goes out in the back of your property, you can make that
When the what?
backhoe back there, when your sewer lateral goes out the back of your property, you need to get equipment back there to excavate it. If you don't have a setback, how are you gonna? That's an issue. I mean, maybe you plan a subdivision, it's all new, you can say, okay, here's the utility easement for the entire line, right? But in an existing infill development, you start doing that, there are consequences to that.
Right, and that is one of the things that many parties have brought up is infill, having municipalities address that type of concern.
So, yeah, so Carson, let's move to the next question. And actually, can we do the distributing time question first? Is it too early to put those? Is the next question that we'll be asking is, he's just gonna reverse the orders, the one envision recommendations would be helpful. Basically, your chance, what additional field that you want envision to consider as part of the separate. While he's putting that in the correct sequence, the timing for when you'll be done with this stage and moving on to the recommendation stage.
So as was mentioned, we've gone through about half of these regulations. We're still doing 35 anyway. And we will finish these up in the next couple, probably the next month. And we're gonna move on to a report, which needs to be by September. We're gonna do it by September, get this done. And then we'll do some trainings, workshops, some additional testimony.
So one of the things you mentioned in the slide is looking at, the biggest impact and then relative support for the changes. I'm curious how you're going to use that support.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, how,
well, this meeting helps, for example, but, we also, I mentioned we have our stakeholder group, the whole city net developers, so we're hoping to work through them to find things that appeal not just to cities, and not just developers, but all.
I think by August, we'll have that third stakeholder meeting I was talking about with more final draft recommendations. We'll have our expert.
We just need more developers in the legislature.
Is there any information we use Lee or we use Lee Ward or Lee Christian Mark to help to provide you to fund your research or your like this? How can we help you read those to you as well as the information? Do you have stakeholder that can do what we help for us to send additional feedback? I think if anyone has thoughts, things that you think we need to hear, feel free to email us, reach out, set up a call.
Well, you see how this goes. One question you take brings up three more questions.
Right.
So it would be awesome to be able to have you do a sounding board for, you're on you're in the front line of the city.
One thing as you're finishing this question survey is the overlapping timeframes. So Laura presented a moment ago, the Guiding Our Growth survey closes at the end of August. The vision reference that they're responsible to do their reports in September. The UEOC will be looking for their recommendations in September. So you can see how all these pieces are going to be coming together. So when I mentioned the 15 housing and growth related UEOC subcommittee meetings in the month of June alone, it's because the next 3 months, there are a lot of moving parts to try to get to policies to consider. So we'll leave this open for another 30 seconds or so to make sure everybody's got a chance to chime in with the caveat that we've got more slide questions for you. That'll get into more specifics that overlap with what was in the envision findings thus far. All right, Ryan, anything else you guys want to add?
Yeah, well, to your point about the guiding our growth, survey as well, that will be really helpful to us to figure out recommendations that are, acceptable to a wide variety of folks, right? Beyond the development of cities, you also have the public, right? And so we're hearing a lot from the public about what kind of future they want to see through that survey. That'll be very helpful.
With that, we appreciate your input. Please, if you have questions next meeting, reach out. We'll do our best.
Thanks, guys.
And then Ari and Ryan and your team, thank you for your response to this to us. We've had quite a few meetings with the division staff in the last couple of weeks, and I appreciate your willingness to join this board meeting today. And then if you want to do additional follow-up with cities over the next few weeks, let us know. Whether it's set, we're going to have the city management association. Whether it's specific regions of the state, city managers, other cross-section department facilitated conversation piece. Now is the conversation piece, we've got to be fully engaged, because come the fall, some of the, come the fall, it may be too late for the conversation.
Would it be all right if we get a copy of what we all said, because we were all typing and it was just going. And so it would be helpful if we could all see what each other said.
Yeah, we will do a board recap, email this week, without feedback period in this.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna continue with screening the Slido vein. We'll do a quick report on the UEOC. Person, you're still driving the slide, right? Yep. Next slide. Here, Christina.
We can do the slide on once and stay now.
I moved it to the end. I'll do it natural. Yep, sure. It's there. It's okay. We're going back. We're coming back to the slide.
So we can have it voting in.
Yes, it'll be on the screen. Yeah. So these will be the questions we're gonna ask you momentarily in Slido. Again, wanted to just plant the seed in your mind. This is in this packet as well. But we're gonna ask you some specific questions around owner occupied first time homes, what incentives could facilitate more housing in commercial zones, parking requirements, setbacks, infrastructure, capital cost funding, and knowledge is, and what are the tools, and then transportation utility. On the transportation utility fee, our board meeting ends at 11:30-ish, and I have a Zoom call with the UEOC folks to talk about transportation utility fees, which are out. It's the number one item on the transportation committee's agenda. So again, these are your directions. Yeah, so that's the overarching thing. Put those in the back of your mind. Here's your quick recap of what's happening in other states. This is an editorial cartoon from the Dallas Morning News. At the end of this was just a few weeks ago, and the Texas legislature essentially stripped cities of a huge swath of local control over the opposition of Texas Municipal League. These are headlines since mid-year. Right, so remember mid-year we showed a slide with a whole bunch of headlines. These are headlines since mid-year. The Montana, Florida, then here locally, lead to us a CNN story about parking. The two states recently been in the headlines, and Governor Cox referenced both of these states at the ULCT a couple of weeks ago, Colorado, Montana. The bill failed in Colorado a couple of weeks ago. The Montana League worked on these bills collaboratively in Montana, though. Personally, they give me a lot of pause about the new Montana League yet. A few days. Now, in the case of Colorado, this is the laundry list of the zoning preemptions. They range from house ADUs by right everywhere in residential areas to preempting any land use regulation that quote individually or cumulatively creates unreasonable costs or delays. Go ahead and ask me what that definition is, because it was, I can't answer it. And then they would essentially create statewide ordinances that would become the default in a variety of ways. Now, the Colorado League proposed this bill, and essentially we put it more on the governor one, and there's a lot of hard feelings in town between Governor Polis and the Colorado League. I know they're actually there on the street, and I know the league director from Colorado and DC a couple weeks ago to talk about it. On the Montana side, the four bills that they passed some look like ours. They actually reached out to us to learn about the modern housing plan approach that we've taken here. So on the left, you'll see a lot of overlap with what we've done here. On the right, you'll see that the bills that passed in Montana preempt local zoning and allow for housing in commercial areas and parking, allow for duplexes and ADUs and all that. Those are items that we have brought up here in the last few years. Okay, as I mentioned, the governor referenced Colorado, Montana, the ULCT needs things to look at. There was no decision made at the ULCT, and Mayor Ramsey spoke up at the ULCT about the approaches that we could use out there. There's a lovely flow chart. So just the growth, transportation, CHA, those two circles on the right, those are the ones that combined have 15 meetings in the next slide. Here's a calendar that we've referenced several times. This is just ULCT, just the ambitious Utah dates. Align with this and subdivision, like lots of things to go together. Next slide. Okay, so last year we built these tables. Hopefully they'll also help this year as we talk through things. So within the CHA, you'll see the column left is the perceived problem, and then the PRC stands for the property rights coalition. These are ideas that they had raised within the CHA. The lead response thus far was that we've been deliberating. There's Mastrini, Mayor Ramsey, Carson and I are in lots of different meetings. In fact, I was talking to somebody who's not related to cities at all. Carson reached out to me over the weekend to say we've been doing a phenomenal job advocating for cities in the funding subgroup of the CHA. So we are pushing back everywhere. There's Mastrini, Mayor Ramsey, Carson, me, Justin, who's ever in these meetings. But again, if you say no to everything, then you can lose your seat at the table. So you'll see in that fourth column is the ULCT counter, and we have put forward some really important counter proposals in recent years. In the case of the public clamor piece, general plans and zoning process, subdivisions was a key piece in 2021 the retail incentives bill. Then that last column was a quick snapshot of our LPC survey results, which I carry around with me everywhere I go. You and your city colleagues, over 100 responses in the last 2 summers have given us the general parameters of what you're comfortable with and what you find concerning. So you'll see we've again summarized them here. So if, for example, the legislature were to pursue binding general plans, making something administrative, of the 77 policy outcomes that we've asked league members about, binding general plans scored in the bottom 17% of those outcomes. So not a lot of room for us to negotiate on that, because our members have told us we're opposed to this. It's not their policy. Fire right housing consists of general plan, still in the bottom third. In the vacant retail or houses becoming housing. This one's interesting. This will be a part of the slide question momentarily. Is when we ask the question, is it comfortable or concerning about state incentives to facilitate vacant retail or vacant commercial housing? The incentives question scored about 40%. When we reframe the question about mandates, it's scored about 20%. So we're going to ask this slide question momentarily for ideas of what would those incentives look like? What could they look like in a way that would fit in that top 40%? On the parking regulations increasing the housing costs, and this was part of the Montana bill, also part of the Colorado bill. Others have said we should have a statewide reduction of parking minimums in commercial areas or residential areas. We've asked some questions in this space. So we asked, would you support state money for structured parking to facilitate housing? And you can see top 25% of results. And then when we added we made it even more specific by reducing the parking costs to facilitate affordable housing, it still scored fairly high. The mandate to reduce parking near transit scored the bottom third. So again, incentive versus mandate, but we have not asked it for residential areas or commercial areas. We'll ask you momentarily in the slide. So I know I'm hitting with a bunch of context here. I'm trying to inform the slide of question momentarily. Next slide, person.
So while you're doing that, I just want to say that one of the things that at least I try to stress and people others as well on some of these meetings is, we've done a lot in our state in the past few years to implement some data collection to be able to measure what's working, what's not working, and things like that. We are not being successful with kind of slow the process of new legislation down with the idea of waiting to find out waiting to look at that data and find out what it's telling us. So we're still getting pressure from some of these things, and they're being recommended to us saying, oh, this passed in another state, so it's a great idea. And we've been trying to say, well, wait a minute, some of those things that passed in other states are actually terrible ideas. And you know, there's no guarantee that those kinds of things will either take us pause and kind of find out, you know, are we doing something that's working or not? You know, and this is in an environment, I think, where we you know, presented and know that we have, you know, 100,000 tower units that aren't being built yet. You know, why isn't that solving the shortage problem? You know, what's going on there? So anyway, I'm trying to say it's just a difficult discussion to have, because it doesn't seem like we can credit anything that we've done in the past. It's like always more and more and more. And we are trying to force this through the more focused lens of what is this going to do to promote housing affordability? Because some of these things really are not affordability things. We talk about some of the setbacks and some of the height things that they want to change. That doesn't promote affordability at all in a single family construction. It just gives you a bigger house that you can sell for more. And that's not what we're trying to do.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So this will be the last table, and I'll go more context slides, and we'll slide it back up. I'll go back to the table. So this first line is the perceived problem is one we all agree on. There's a lack of first-time homes for home buyers. Legislature last year allocated $50 million for new homes at 1,000. So one of the ideas is better to make duplexes available by right, potentially in single family zoning. That makes it easier to this price point. Our response is in the data set, and looking closer at the potential nuances to how that 50 million can be spent. Nevertheless, just so everyone's aware, if you see survey results, preemption will allow duplexes or ADUs by right, statewide scoring about 10%. Likewise on setback fees, we haven't ever asked our members questions about the setbacks fees. So we'll be doing that one in the slide up. And then on the infrastructure, this is one I think we all agree, and it's one of our training questions, that infrastructure is a challenge to get new housing as well, whether it's greenfield or redevelopment like we're seeing in the city. When we asked the question last year about the state authorizing bids without local government approval, that also scored 1%. Justin and I have a meeting with key legislators this week, talking about the next steps on it. So, next slide, Carson. Based on the feedback that the league members gave us throughout the spring, these are the ideas that we brought forward to the UEOC. On the left is the shop policy group and the shop data group. So we've talked about some of these at the board meeting in April and May. On the right is the technical list in the land use housing space. So just, well, these are the ideas that we have brought forward in these meetings. So it's not just saying no, we'll offer these other ideas as alternatives, again, based on the feedback we received from the members through the spring. Thanks. Likewise, in the UEOC growth subgroup, in the transit space, we have a meeting later this month to talk about the transit innovation grants that came out of the mid-year conference. Also, how to maximize the stationary plan and HDRZ's tools that can really replicate the vineyard model, where in the case of vineyard, they're using HDRZ to go from units that are 6 stories high to units that are going to accommodate over 80 residential units to the acre in areas of fund for converting wood to steel, and also structured parking there. And on the right, you'll see the other growth subgroups on alignment and the user fees, transportation utility fee, at the top of that list, but the future thereof, which impacts not just the 13 cities that have imposed the transportation utility fee, but the cities that have considered. The other thing for our friends in rural Utah is we're having a meeting at noon today to talk about transportation utility fee, but also the idea of doing some pilot programs in rural Utah, similar to the tolling that we have in 15 or Mill Creek Canyon, generate revenue from tourist visitors who are on these state routes that access destinations and tourism areas, to then be able to collect some of that revenue to invest in local. So that was one of the ideas that our members proactively about this. Okay, Carson. Transportation utility fee, quick context, so everyone's on the same page before we open up the slide over here. We won at court. Kudos to Pleasant Grove. We won in February. The Supreme Court ruled that yes, the transportation utility fee is a fee, not a tax, which means that we can impose it under our underlying police power that the state constitution and state statute grants to cities. We don't have to ask permission of the legislature to impose a transportation utility fee. In a lot of other states, the cities would have to ask permission, but that's not the legal framework in Utah. That's Supreme Court
Yeah.
case. Well, yeah, Hutchinson got overruled, and if Hutchinson gets overruled, then, Todd Shaken said, no, someone's just retired at that point. But Utah is a very, I really need to drive this point home. Utah is a very unique legal framework. We are not a mother may I state. We're not a home rule state. Those are the terms you hear the terms home rule, dealing around the country. We are not a dealing state that we don't need to ask permission from the legislature because we have general authority. Unless the legislature has already stepped in. So once the legislature steps in, then we lose that authority. But in most states around the country, you have to actually ask permission in order to do something. Or their home rule, we're not quite home rule, we're not dealing with the only state in the country that exists in this space legally. So the Supreme Court ruling is a huge win for that space, for our one-of-a-kind legal structure in the state of Utah. Specifically, transportation utility fees are being on tax. We have the authority, but the court did not rule on the reasonableness of the fee. They left that unanswered, and the litigation was dropped. So that question is just moving. And there are some in the legislature that would like to revisit that question on the reasonableness. We already know, we included in your board back, Experts Association. I said it's going to be a top priority for the legislature to step in and essentially preempt the ability of cities to do transportation utility fees. And Libertas is also going to post to it very much to help bring the lawsuit in the first place.
Do you know who would be leading that legislation?
I'll come back to that. Yeah. Right now, we have a favorable legislator who wants to help preserve the tool. We don't know if the legislature may run a bill. That's what we'll get a better read of that. Okay, Carson. Just, you want to do a quick overview here, next slide, we'll jump into the slide.
Yeah, really quick. So the other two ones we mentioned, the government efficiency group, really, do with their name, it's very efficient. But looking at two big things, and you're going to hear about this not just in the ULCT. There's a lot of discussions around how are boards and commissions created, what do they do to keep them going or get rid of them, what should it take to create a board and commission, but that's a big one they're talking about there. And then another, just everyone talking about customer service. How can we better, and a lot of it's going to be state agencies. I don't see much, but trickling down necessarily to municipal level, but there's just discussions about how can they have better customer service for particularly the public. In water and natural resources, there are 4 separate groups there. It's important to note that last year this was really the water group, and they added natural resources and energy development this year. So the top 2, you have nuclear energy development and energy transition. We're really watching those. That's not anything we're getting, unless anyone really wants to get into nuclear. That's nothing that we're really jumping into in any real way. But then water infrastructure and water savings. A lot of the discussions around water infrastructure and water savings so far are big level, high level infrastructure discussions. There's not as much about some secondary water metering and other things to discuss. But I'm on both of those subgroups. And so if there are things that pop up that we need to worry about there, we'll bring those back to you to talk about. But so far, we're not seeing anything like when we saw secondary metering, 2 sessions ago. It is important if you're a municipal power city, some of the energy transition discussions are things we're going to watch for. A couple of the legislators involved here are legislators who are not historically friendly to municipal power cities. So we'll want to keep an eye on those, but as of yet, nothing that's jumping out we need a flag. So that's why you only need one side on this today.
Perfect. Thank you, Justin. There's also a lot of moving parts in the public safety space and other things that just aren't time sensitive for us today. We're tracking those too. Okay. Then we're going to hold a webinar next week in the child land use space. We're setting up an infrastructure work group meeting from the LPC. July 17th, we're holding a meeting of the caucus of first and second class, and then the board will next meet, in August, unless the officers are need to be before that. We will review all of these survey results that we're about to do with the officers to determine if we need the board to meet between now and August. But those are some checkpoints that we already have. For the next 2 months. So, and then of course, as other ideas come to mind in the next few days, follow up with us. We've got 10 slide questions for you, so we'll plan on taking a minute per slide of a question here. So we can make sure to get all of your input. So first, log back in.
It's the same thing as before, so if you had a review of the rest.
Presumably, all the folks that are not the board members in term are not participating in the slide. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page.
That is correct.
We didn't before, we won't now.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, let's go. So,
You want a timer?
first question is how can we collectively facilitate housing production for first-time home buyers? So this is trying to get to our couple of our key framing questions that you heard last month around emphasis on owner occupancy and actual affordability. And when we talk about first-time home buyers, and the target we are focused on is that $50 million program that the city created. Right now is shooting at that $450,000 mark. So I'll start talking to you in a sec to think through that. That's the high level question, and we'll get to specific.
That 450 may be adjusted.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's in the 450s where we started and 30s.
That was the 1 minute on that question.
No, it's fine. The addition, the other thing this will help us with is Carson is putting the finishing touches on our internal housing land use survey. It's the one that produced 111,000 last year. And we asked a question at the City Management Association conference this spring about how many city managers were seeing the build for rent product in their communities, and basically we haven't enough. So that's going to be part of our.
Last week, that builder who won our highest zone by 20 we didn't ask for this comment back, but I was assured of this is not. This will be very high end at 20. We look at this as a product which should be that lower medium, and they want luxury, high end on this back instead of short.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for this general feedback. Yeah, this gets to the mixed use piece. Again, it's part of Montana, Colorado bills. It's one of the questions regarding our growth. Part of the Mission Utah review. What sort of incentive would interest your community in line one mixed use housing development? Zones? When we ask the membership, it's scored in the top 40%. When we ask about incentives, scored at about 20% about mandates. So help us fill in some blanks here. What type of incentives? Is the infrastructure, is the parking structures? What is it?
appreciate whoever said bring back the Johnson.
Oh, man, I almost did agree with that.
Any more seconds, then we will finish. First, let's move to the next one. This question gets to mixed use piece, but also deals with what you get calls about all the time, which is parking. Reducing parking requirements in your commercial areas, on mixed use housing in your city, so, you know, yes, no, maybe, depends, like, this is kind of that trade-off. If the legislature would come back and say, we want to, you know, have state parking reduction, that therefore would increase housing, do you think that would actually occur? For those of you that are saying no, maybe give us a little context, no, because of this reason, or yes, if this happened.
You mean like, heck, you know?
Yeah.
By the way, Karen, I know that it's come up before in other meetings, but for some communities, especially in more rural areas where there are big parks, areas, the whole thing for short-term rentals is really impacting that. And the state has been in the past so supportive of short-term rentals. And it's like, okay, if you want to improve the housing situation, housing availability for those communities, then there needs to be some controls on that. So is that going to be part of this discussion?
We tried last year to elevate short-term rentals in the housing affordability space. And there was a mixed bag on the outcome. Ultimately, no bill passed. It was a bill, it just ended up not passing for another reason. So I agree with you that short-term rental piece has to be part of it. Has to be part of it.
I think what would help too, Cam, is if they would, you're gonna put like stacked housing in commercial development. Then if it's, when you get to a certain maximum number of units, it's not about housing, it's about a business. They ought to pay more property tax. And whether that's the full amount that a commercial space would pay, or in between what a housing reduction is in property tax, should be some adjustment for that, because I don't think that's, it's different when you're at 350 units stacked in a commercial area versus a single family home.
Right. But they're treated the same.
Yeah.
It's a fair point.
Can you brought up the fact that people are pushing for transparency?
Yeah. Yeah, not even this week, but yeah, that property tax piece is gonna be part of the conversation. What it looks like is still up in the air. Okay, let's go to the next one. This is helpful feedback. So this is parking, but in residential areas. This has come up quite a bit about reducing parking minimums for residential development in residential areas. So how would that affect your community? This was part of the dialogue last year on the street width piece. Again, give us your thoughts here, legislature. State and cities that reduce parking minimums in residential areas. What does that look like? What's the something that is unsurprising, so it's yeah, it's helpful.
Town, who's looking at driveways with a 2-car garage, that's something you can, those are the most things. And create congestion.
Well, actually, if I were just relative to more creative parking opportunities, I think it's, you know, that's getting to that design piece. A lot of overlap here with parking near transit or when there's transit options versus parking. Transit options. Okay.
And to that, what can you
Well,
said,
so we're low 25.
you said one size fits all, that certainly applies to parking requirements within the cities. It may make sense to have some targeted policy in areas that are served by high capacity transit, but it wouldn't make sense in other areas.
My guess is those cities are doing, their parking requirements are probably different than mine.
Okay, next question, Carson. We're halfway through. How would state restrictions on residential setbacks affect your community? This came up a little bit during the vision piece, we asked the benefits around setbacks, we can look at the feedback.
Which setbacks? All types.
We're keeping it open-ended intentionally, so you could give us your thoughts here. Yeah, we're anticipating a lot of dialogue in this space this time. That's what. Two quick things for, and we should be done by 11:36.
Okay.
Which Bob?
Watching that one on the hot.
Okay, I'm actually.
With our laptops.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Good. Okay, now we're gonna move to infrastructure. We've been successful at the Capitol, pointing out the part of the reason these 111,000 units that are entitled but not being built. Part of the reason for that is the choke point on infrastructure. That in turn has been used by some of the proponents of lids and dids to say this is why we need lids or dids without city approval, so that we can just move forward and do it. So if not lids or dids, are there other tools that your cities have used that would be worth us raising in these discussions to fund infrastructure capital costs?
The infrastructure that you're using, revolving loan, like what about that would be. Great.
Last year, we had a good board discussion about state infrastructure funded, and so today going back to what we just probably discussed last year. Yeah.
Discussion down with us also.
This
We have one that legislature moves us. council already. The developer hasn't finished the one. I think it's a big one.
Yeah, let's speak, when it's looking in the infrastructure space, this gets to the transportation utility fee. I'm going to.
I am.
Someone interested, there it is. Or, no, go back to the previous ones. So if you already have it, please mark yes unless you're going to move it. Basically, we're just trying to get something to do with there's cities beyond the 13 that proposed it that are interested in adopting. Good news is this is a quick one. The next one. Okay, this is the conversation starting anew today. There's discussion, in fact, remember we were talking earlier, that the board was silent about the reasonableness of Pleasant Grove's fee. And the reasonableness can include everything from process and how to impose a fee versus including the amount that Pleasant Grove imposed. So please rate your comfort level so it actually should say, if the state were to impose the following statutory limitations, like the cap on the fee applies to all users, or applies to property owners, the property taxes. So these
As for it and if it's reasonable.
How do you let it go propose
they put it on the utility bill. They did it, so this is like, this question is focused on kind of the points that we're hearing from some of the others in the space, which is around caps and it should only apply to property tax. People who pay property tax, not all users, etc. So these are the ones that, from staff perspective, causes concern. But we want to get the group as well. The way Councilor Bradshaw and Pleasant Grove has done is they along with Provo and others imposed on the utility bill. They did a study, showed the need, created a separate account, and then money goes into that separate account. It's currently been sitting there unused for several years because of litigation. And then there was an assessment made depending on how much you use the transportation system. So Pleasant Grove, they have 3 categories. American Food Standard, like 7, am I running this correctly?
Yeah, but that helps be more on, let's just keep it, the transportation fee, because once we start paying safety, we just.
Sure, I agree. But the categories of users in the city.
Yeah.
If you had a utility hookup, then is it weighted for residential?
Residential versus commercial. Yeah, and there are 2 different types of commercials.
There's probably a lot of people out there. Opt out, they opt down, opt down, so it's true.
Yeah, so this is good to know that if the conversation goes into this space, there's concern. All right, the next question. Okay, so these are more on the process. So this would be that the city has to do a study, you have to do a public hearing to adopt it, you know, a designated account. This focuses more on the process of considering and implementing the transportation. So So as you're filling out this question, almost everybody's filled it out. Are there any other general questions about transportation utility fee or parking or mixed use or any of the things we've tried to collect some rapid fire slide of responses from?
I have this question on this last one, a study, a study from one city to another might be different, and so the cost associated with that could really be a hindrance to smaller cities who are looking to implement this because of all sorts of reasons. But a study might then say, oh, it's going to cost, $100,000 or $200,000, and that's out of our reach, and so we'll just give it up. I mean, we don't get to utilize the tool. And so I don't, in my somewhat concern is, I would like us to advocate for, reasonable, so. Not these just in that, oh, we need engineers hired, we need this and that, you know. That prohibits then a lot of people come to this.
I do think though that there are going to be consultants that get that in this, and that it's far less complicated for a smaller community and that could be for other communities, so that they may be able to scale the cost of that, maybe be something that comes down. I just think that may be part of it.
The other thing of note on the study piece is the key distinction between a fee and a tax. The fee is tied to users. So the study helps establish the nexus as opposed to a general tax. Marianne, you have your hand up, then we have one more slide up question, and then we'll do the annual preview. So 36 is admittedly aggressive, but should be done by 4. So Marianne.
Well, you can go ahead and do your last slide of question. I just wanted to thank everybody really quickly. It's nothing new that hasn't been covered. It's all been covered. But to let you know, this feedback, not only are we taking it back to all these committees, the gazillion meetings Cam said is happening this month, and they are. But I'm trying to, not trying, I am succeeding at saying these things and sharing these concerns vocally. You may be surprised there's nowhere on the agenda at UEOC that says, okay, ULCT, how do you guys feel? That does not exist. So I'm seen as a bit of a disruptor, just kind of interjecting in the meeting and giving the opinion of cities and just giving some feedback from cities. But I think it's important that everyone there hear it, and that it's very public, and that it's part of a bigger process outside of, there's a lot of great folks working on all of these committees, but I think it also needs to be heard by all the good people in that big UEOC room. So anyway, I just want to thank you for this feedback and let you know we're doing the best we can to really try to get this message out everywhere we can. So keep up the good work, and thanks for all your help with it.
Thank you, Mary. That's nice segue to the final catch-all. So Carson, you open the last catch-all question. This is well, he's pulling up the catch-all. The question will be, where should the state focus its efforts to improve housing affordability? And that, there are other ideas that come to mind over the last 45 minutes. We can do the slide over from here. If you have other ideas, let us know. We will review all of these responses, organize them internally, send out a review email to the board that recaps this, and then we'll coordinate with the officers as we go into these meetings that all this on topic. So here's your last catch-all question here. Again, looking for meaningful feedback, so that as we're advocating, we aren't just receiving that we would know, but we're bringing these additional ideas forward. Hopefully, this actually summarizes what we've done in the previous 10 slide questions. Anyway, we'll give you 1 minute to do this. Thank you everybody for the feedback here. We're gonna take 2 minutes, and Molly, I'll take 1 minute at the end of yours. So Nick comments, just give a quick update on what we're looking at for annual keynotes, and we're gonna be on the dignity index.
Sure, I'll take the dignity index. So we've been looking at since mid-year how to kind of carry that through and make it something that's carry through the concept, but actually towards implementation. So we've been working with Tim Piper on that. We might be doing an event up in Cass County that we're looking forward to. And additionally, we're looking at potentially bringing a resolution to the board and to broader membership about value and usability in the discourse. So looking at potential candidate budgets since we're in the municipal year for folks to agree to campaign, which is going to be employee contempt. And additionally, looking at, some kind of op-eds that mayors could be running, if you know, in a monthly newsletter, that you could be putting in that. So we'll be working on that. And we've also solidified our keynote speakers for the annual, and I'll pass it over to Katie, so promo that.
Our one keynote, one of two keynotes will be Laura Ling. She is a journalist who in 2009 was documenting trafficking of North Korean women. And her and her colleague accidentally crossed over into North Korea and they were captured for about 140 days. She's a pretty inspiring story, and she'll be the one keynote. Our next keynote will have a cybersecurity theme to it, and is Eric O'Neill, who captured the notorious U.S. spy Robert Hansen, who also happened to pass away last year.
And we're excited for both of those. Laura being also kind of curious to do that dignity index. A lot of what she talks about is the connection that even though she was in captivity, she was able to forge with the guards through that time. And so we're excited to hear that as well as the cybersecurity. Those are two topics that we always hear that we want more on. And so we're excited to deliver on that in a bit of a new creative way.
Perfect. Thank you, Molly. Thank you, Katie. We'll be signing those contracts today, so you're the first to hear about those two keynotes for Wednesday, Friday. Thursday will be Planners Day. We're finalizing the keynote that will deliver the planners message for this. We referenced countless times today. Third week of September is a big week because of all these deadlines that are coming together in the planning space. Mayor MJC, you have your hand raised. Is that?
I think that's the old one.
Is that the current one or old?
Do we get to the state there?
That's on the table. It's something we're still trying to figure out that you can use. That's one of the options. So we should have all those details for you.
Well, we're waiting to, I just want to give a brief report on so on that. Let's vote. Processes in Salt Lake County. We've had a couple of meetings of people that were designated issue. We kind of well, that down to a smaller subcommittee of the executive committee, if you will. And we've had, I think, 3 municipalities offer location for consideration. One of which is a facility that is at the very top of the list last year for us, but wasn't available due to some sort of barriers that have been relaxed. So I'm actually really grateful for that. Step up basically.
Thank you, Mayor Ramsey. There's no hands, so we're good there. Last thing for the annual convention is just some of our own internal pieces. We have opened up applications for the Taylor Service Award that will close August 1st. So please submit recommendations. Last year we had a double-digit number now. Great. A lot of fantastic mayors and council members who were nominated. We'll be recognizing retiring mayors and council members at the conference. So if you know some of your colleagues who are nominating for re-election, make sure we know so they can be part of the recognition. While the residents that are considering asking you as a board to do policy resolution for the disability space, the policy resolution process closes August 1st. And we will have vacancies on the league board of directors, which are listed here. And that this is open until August 1st as well, right, Nick?
Yes.
As this board meets, we will already be in the process, the vetting process for nominations committee. If your name is highlighted in blue or the vacant spot of second vice president, your term is up and we'd love to have you continue. We appreciate your service. If you choose not to run, if you are listed in white or you are up but not going to run again, we welcome your participation on the nominations committee. As Mayor Clusi knows from last year, that is a difficult task because the interest in being on the league board has never been higher. Mayor Clusi has never served here 3 times the number of spots for it.
It's so fun to meet with this, and I always speak them, so. Tends to work.
So we will next see the board on August 14th, unless the officers know we need to meet before then. Our first officers take 30 seconds to touch base. As we leave here, those of you who are in person, I'm going to turn back to you for motion to adjourn. Thank you for all the tremendous feedback you gave us today.
Really quick, Cam, you'll see just below this in your packet, is the nominations material. There's a link there if you want to nominate yourself or a colleague. You can find everything you need in your packet right there.
Thanks, Nick. Is there any other business?
We just go to.
Go roller skating.
Where do we get a motion?
That was a motion.
Motion second.
All in favor? Aye.